busy living sober, busy living sober, busy living sober. I'm so, I say I'm so excited to have so many guests on, but I'm so honestly just, I'm excited to share like what your journey's been like, how you came to Noughty, which is a non-alcoholic drink. And today I have Amanda Thomson on, who started and founded Noughty AF, which is a non-alcoholic wine and champagne. And when we talked, now I'm going to tell my listeners, I talked to you, I guess it was like a month and a half ago.
It's a little way away. So thank you for having me, first of all.
Thank you so much for saying yes, that you would come and tell us your story.
Delighted. It was an honor. You're fantastic.
Oh, so are you. I feel like you're my friend already, and that I can't wait to meet you in real life one day. So will you tell us about, for one, you grew up in the UK and your mom was kind of, what do you call her? She was a pioneer, or what would you say, in the plant-based world, because she did this prior to anybody else did.
It was really, there's a famous Malcolm Gladwell book, The Tipping Point. She was way too early. She was into the health food space in the 70s. I mean, it was considered hippie back then, I guess, rather than fashion forward. So this is way before Whole Foods. I mean, crazy times. I remember it was a little bit strange that I was eating muesli for breakfast and I wasn't allowed refined sugar. I mean, these things now are quite normal in that kind of health food world. But back then, I remember really craving like white bread and like sweets and like eating them at friends' houses with excitement because I had such a healthy diet at home.
And your mom did it just because she knew that sugar was bad for you? Like, how would someone know that back in the 70s? Because it was everything.
It's a good question. I suppose she was a big reader of what was happening in that kind of space, and she was quite analytical. So yeah, I guess she was a bit thought leader, but not in a macro sense, just really on a micro family sense. I guess the sorts of diets that we all know are best for us now, whether or not we stray. Yeah, she was really ahead of that curve. And this was really just to put food on the table, because my parents divorced when I was young and she was delivering health foods on a bicycle. I mean, this was really just like a sort of really tiny concern that she brought into my world, really just to make sure we could live. It wasn't really like she'd approached it as a growing business concern. But I suppose to link up with my story today, I was always very analytical about the provenance of things we were consuming. I'm not saying I didn't stray in different directions like we all do, but I guess I was a little bit fast forward in my brain as to recognizing those things that aren't good for us in that regard.
And tell us this. So then you ended up, so your mom raised you mainly, not your dad, right?
Yeah, I saw my dad. I mean, this was in the days of divorce in the UK, certainly, where it wasn't really regular that you would have any kind of shared custody. So I would just occasionally be ferried to my father's. I would see him perhaps every other weekend. I had a relationship, but it was a much more distant one when I was younger because of the situation.
It's so amazing. Your mom obviously did a very good job. Let's just face that. Okay. Because look at who you are and what you've done in your life. So you then ended up going to university and majoring.
Yeah, actually nothing to do with wine whatsoever. I had a place to read English at Glasgow and I got the grades, which were fairly high. And then I did a classic, maybe entrepreneurialism was in my blood early. Looking back, I did a bit of a U-turn. What do we call it in founder space? We call it pivot. I went off actually to Sheffield in the north of England to study film and documentary, which was very uncharted territory, not considered terribly academic. So yeah, I mean, even back then, I guess I had a rebellious streak.
But it was amazing because you had this dream. And so so you graduated from there and you went off and started working for the BBC?
I did. I became a journalist, and actually, I'm undermining my work ethic, I guess, because even when I was studying for this kind of arts-based course and looking at filmmaking, documentary was my buzz. I've always been a documentary nerd. Those of you who are out there, I mean, if I'm going to watch something on TV, I would much rather it was factual. I love to learn stuff. And so documentaries were always my thing, and I used to romanticize making them. But I guess I ended up in a form of storytelling, which was journalism. And actually, because I'm demonstrative, big eyes, big smile, perhaps I'd have fitted in better initially in the American media. For the UK media, which is really fairly buttoned up, or at least it used to be, I wasn't amazing at hard news, so I kind of got chaperoned into the fun stuff, which was the arts world, which was film, fashion, music. And that was really when my love of fine wine and champagne was born. I always say it's quite easy to be snobby about things when you're not paying, and that was how it was back in my day at the Cannes Film Festival. This was before social media, and I'd be handed a glass of something delicious. And that was really where my formative imagery around the romanticism of champagne was formed. And that was really what started the seed of the idea, which was initially to create my own champagne brand. This is way before I moved into non-alcoholic.
And when did you decide to go into the champagne world? I know you went to the Cordon Bleu.
Yeah, I moved to France in 2010, actually. And I guess that's kind of the start of the journey. It's like most founder stories, the journey is much longer and much more nuanced than the kind of pithy elevator pitch soundbite. But yeah, I moved to France. I did a year in Paris, sort of researching the wine business, getting to know some of the industry players. And I had a sommelier mentor at that time, who was very well known in the wine world. And then I ended up doing the first ever wine diploma at Cordon Bleu. So the famous Culinary Institute, I'm sure a lot of you know, Cordon Bleu, the original's based in Paris, but they have spin-offs around America and around the world. And they had just started their wine diploma. So I was one of the first inaugural students, I guess a slightly older student because it was my second career. But that brought together people who were interested in wine from all aspects of making, to marketing, to doing really any number of things from all over the world. So that was a crazy year. Full-time studies, traveling, spending time stage, they call it, which is basically an internship, harvesting, working in a Paris restaurant, assisting the teams. I mean, you name it. I was really back to school.
And that must have been felt kind of crazy, being that you had this steady thing with the BBC. It takes a lot of courage to say, you know what, I'm going to, as your word that you used, pivot and leave this glamour life of sexiness, right? You're meeting George Clooney, you're meeting all these fabulous people, and to say, you know what, I'm going to change.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as a journalist, once a journalist, always a journalist in your heart. I mentioned learning. I'm always learning. I've always had a thirst for knowledge and to be around great people who know stuff. And I'm a Gemini. I don't know if that's pertinent, but I am a magpie. And so I'm always looking to pick up new nuggets of information. And I suppose the other element of journalism is you're very future facing. So zeitgeist, trends, where's the world going on a macro level? And also a search for the truth, actually, which has been a relevant part of my story, I think. And so, yes, it was a very romantic idea. And then you're absolutely right. A lot of it wasn't romantic. And what I mean by that was I was used to being in a dual income family, and I had kids at this point. And, there were many challenges. And also being an older student where you've had a successful career and then you're sometimes patronized, I suppose it's fair to say, as someone who doesn't know much. And to be fair, I didn't know a lot in the wine business, but of course I'd had quite a successful career. So yeah, there was a lot of change, a lot of learning, a lot of humor, a lot of challenges. I think all of the above.
But to somebody that's out there that has this dream that's within them, and they say, you know what, I can't do it because of whatever, right? I have kids, I have a husband, I have to focus on, I have to bring in this income. And what would you say to that person that has all these fears, because they're all fears, right? That stand in our way to going and getting our dreams, but you still went, even though you probably had all these fears. What would you say to somebody who's out there who's like, I'm too scared to do this?
That's a really interesting question. And it's a bit of a grey answer, I think, is honest. I mean, naivety is a wonderful thing. And I always sort of caveat when I'm giving anyone advice that I think is really important in case anybody listens. You know, somebody might. I'm sure you have many listeners. I mean, in terms of actually acting on my advice, I take it quite seriously when I'm giving it. So I think the grey area of that sort of question is, you know, we all have fears. That's normal. I think fear is important for growth for many reasons. I guess, you know, the flip of it is what happens in my life if I don't do this. And I've always been quite visionary, and I always think when I get to the end of my life, and I'm not religious, I'm open-minded and spiritual, but I feel like I want to leave a literal legacy, if that makes any sense, because I'm not convinced I'll be back. I'm open-minded to people who want to tell me otherwise. And so I think in my mind, I was thinking, well, what if I don't do this? And so sometimes I think it's quite an interesting game to play, because we're all scared, we're all stuck, we all get comfortable. The big important caveat to this is I never want to encourage anyone to make themselves vulnerable financially. And so I think it's not sensible in the modern world to encourage anybody to leap without a safety net. So I would never encourage anyone to leap and put themselves in a precarious financial position. In that regard, I would say start something as a side hustle, if that makes sense, because I don't want anyone to leap into something and not have a safety net and their whole life goes the wrong way. I mean, that would be dangerous. I guess I had a safety net, I had a husband, and he was earning an income. So I wasn't going to be homeless if this didn't work out. That said, my pressure was a lot of it self-pressure, because as soon as I'd given up a career and said I was going to do something, and I think the accountability piece is very important in this conversation, I would say to people, make yourself accountable. Tell somebody who is a good friend, who's not going to tell you it's a ridiculous idea. You need one cheerleader, just one. Because if you tell lots of people, they'll persuade you out of it. If you find your cheerleader and you tell them, this is what I want to do, can you make me accountable? And I remember there was a few sort of elements of that where I sort of said, I'm going to do this. And then I had one friend who's like, well, when are you going to do it? I'm like, yeah, when am I going to do it? And actually, give my husband his due, he was really that person who he's like, we're moving to Paris for this. And once I'd kind of gone, oh, yes, we are, the train starts moving and there's no moving back. And actually, to be really frank with you, and this is a pertinent part of the truthful story, I didn't actually have a fully formed plan then. I romanticized working with champagne, and I knew I could make a difference in the world somehow, but the business plan was not there. So, you know, I was really making myself quite scared and pressured along the journey, but I guess I would have made myself accountable by talking it up, making the move, and then I did feel a lot of pressure, and that was pressure on myself, which for me was good pressure. But I think the important thing about entrepreneurship and being a founder is, I have to say from the beginning, if we don't kind of recognize that we're all scared of really so many things in life, that's just a fact. We have to decide that fear is going to be something that we live with. We're not going to stop being scared. Entrepreneurship is not a comfortable place. I'm never comfortable because I'm always searching for the next big thing. So it's not for everybody. And that's where I think it's often worth me encouraging people to explore a side hustle first. You know, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of mental health issues in the founder space that people don't talk about. You have to be your own biggest cheerleader. I think that we often focus on the sexy parts of entrepreneurship, and we have to be realistic. So I think we have to get comfortable with fear, because I'm scared most days of something. And that's the truth of a journey when you're scaling something. And the other day, somebody said to me, oh, you must be really proud of yourself. And I was like, what? No. And I kind of laughed. And she went, well, you just got USA Today top non-alcoholic wine of America. And I was like, yeah, that was cool. But because we're always just looking at the next challenge in front of us, and and you know this, I'm sure, Elizabeth, but if I just take yesterday, for example, I had some of the biggest highs of my business life and one of the biggest lows. And this is sort of how it goes. And you have to get comfortable with those adrenaline swings and then try not to lose your mind and try to stay in that kind of mid space, which is don't get too excited and proud of yourself, but also don't get too depressed. And obviously, luckily, I don't suffer from clinical depression, but I think we have to separate clinical depression from anxiety, which is a little different, right? Which a lot of us have. So that's a lot to unpack. That was a long answer.
No, it was a great answer. I loved it because you made me think of so many things, because being an entrepreneur it is hard. I always think, like, if I just went to work and clocked in and did my job and then I came home and went to bed and I left it there, how much easier would it be on so many levels? Because all night long you're thinking about it, right? You're dreaming about it. You're like, what's going to happen tomorrow? Did I mess this up yesterday? And it's really getting into that space of like owning my feelings and knowing that I am going to have the highs and I am going to have the lows. How were your children? Because I always like to ask this because a lot of moms listen. How were your children during all of this?
I mean, they were young enough just about to make the transition, so that worked. But we have plenty of challenges. Yeah, plenty. So I mean, they're bilingual now, so I guess that was the legacy that the trip and that move for 3 years gave them.
That's so nice. That's so nice. So then you go off and you leave the Cordon Bleu and you decide you're going to make a champagne in the beginning.
Yeah, I was first of all working in the champagne space with a Grand Cru maker. And my speciality and my kind of obsession, because I always say as an entrepreneur, I'm sure you'd agree, Elizabeth, all of us really who've got to any sort of stage in building a business, we're all very good at knowing what we're good at, knowing what we're bad at, and filling in the gaps with great people. And I always say I want to work with great people who are better than me. That's always been my buzz. And I guess it was pretty easy to find great champagne makers. And just to draw a parallel, when I moved into non-alcoholic, the opposite was actually true. And so I was pretty spoiled in the wine world. There are so many incredible makers, and it's more a case of them not getting brand cut through because there's not a great strong brand or a great story. Or so I was kind of a storyteller in that regard, and my speciality was balance without too much dosage. So dosage essentially translates as added sugar. So I was making a Grand Cru champagne, or my maker was, to my recipe that had no added sugar. We were really creating the balance and the structure from what they call reserve wines, which is where you take wines and you put them in a library and they develop complexities. And so that was kind of my buzz. It was working in the high-end champagne and sparkling wine space. So actually no relationship whatsoever with non-alcoholic.
And what happened? What made you again pivot from being in the alcohol to the non-alcoholic realm?
And the beautiful translation of pivot is a crashing U-turn, but we call it romantic pivot, don't we, in the entrepreneurial space, because it just sounds really sexy. And really, like, it's been like this whole kind of, I don't want to swear, but a whole drama, I think is the polite word, behind the scenes, but it's a pivot. It was really born out of this recognition and frustration that whenever I was at my favorite wine dinner, first world problem, or event, what was there to drink for me when I wasn't drinking? Now, as a wine lover, we often stay in our wine lane. So we kind of end up on the water. That's sort of where we go. Now, to bring that longevity to the evening, exactly, we're not normally, and this is just not the norm. Plenty of wine lovers love beer, plenty of wine lovers love spirits. I'm just talking about a lot of wine people. We don't necessarily move to the cocktail world or the alcohol world. And actually a lot was happening, particularly, sorry, the beer world. And a lot was happening in the beer space, where the old days, there was a legacy brand called Caliber that I think was one of those that started the trend. Now in 2023, all of my beer friends are pretty well catered for in the non-alcoholic beer space. I know Bill Schufelt from Athletics done some great work in America, and each beer brand has its own non-alcoholic version now, and it's kind of accepted that that's a no-brainer. there'd been a bit of innovation in the non-alcoholic spirits world, in that kind of low and no ABV spirits world. But apart from the legacy brands that existed in non-alcoholic wine, which I guess wine lovers haven't necessarily built a relationship for a number of reasons, not least the sugar levels or the chemicals and price point and branding and all manner of things. There was really nothing for me to drink when I wasn't drinking. And that blew my mind initially, but I thought, well, I must be wrong. There must be people doing things, but I've just not recognized that. And so I went on this ridiculous mission, and I basically gathered everything that existed all across the globe in that legacy space of non-alcoholic wine. I tasted everything, and it wasn't as uplifting as one might have expected, or certainly nothing like when I tasted every single good champagne in the world. It was a little different. And I realized that no one had approached wine in the non-alcoholic space with that kind of philosophy of a wine brand that happens to be non-alcoholic. And that was kind of this light bulb moment I had, and that became my new obsession on the pivot. And I eventually got my first bottle to market late 2019, actually. I think it was fall 2019 in London, building it out in the traditional way in the upscale hotels. And we all know what happened in 2020, that thing we don't want to talk about. And so that was really, ironically, my brand was built during that really awful period, because the great and the good of the wine world were doubling down together online, like we're talking now, from different countries, different parts of the world, in a way that had never happened before. And I guess as a Brit, I had a very strong relationship with cameras, because I grew up on live TV. I was usually doing my television and radio live. So I understood a camera. So I was on board on Zoom. Some of you will resonate, a really unhealthy amount, but I knew there was the opportunity to share the story. And then we got written about in the wine press by JusticeRobinson.com. The New York Times wrote about us, wine enthusiasts. The ball started rolling that Noughty had done something quite exciting in the non-alcoholic wine space. And then we got our first fine wine distributor in New York. And then it really started to build out from there. And so I find myself talking to you now in 2023, albeit having been through many challenges in the business space, you know, as we've sort of learned that the world has many complications, and they obviously affect us as human beings, as well as when you're running a business. We're in a exceptionally strong, exciting position, I guess, having been crowned the best non-alcoholic wine of America by USA Today, which was insane because that was consumer voted. So we had the kind of that wonderful media buzz, and then we had the opposite, the antithesis, the consumers voting. So that was really actually quite seismic. So when my friend said, "Are you proud?" I was like, "Well, no, I'm not proud, but I'm blooming delighted." You know, that was a bit of a moment for me as a founder to kind of go, okay, people love us. I mean, that's crazy, because that's kind of when you start to live a dream, to say, if you love us, I can really build something very special here.
It's amazing, because if you get the people, that's what you want, right? You want people talking to their next door neighbor. All right, I have so many questions from that. Number one, how did you not give up and throw in the towel when 2020 hit? Because I'm sure there were so many signs that you're going, oh my gosh, it's not going to work. Now the world's closed. I know I'm doing the Zoom thing, but I'm going to get up and I'm going to keep doing this, and I'm going to keep trudging, even though it feels like I might not get anywhere.
I remember it like yesterday. And leaders of big corporations and me with the scale up, all of us were in that same boat, weren't we? And I guess I realized that my role was leadership, albeit having a small team, same way. And so I remember that Zoom, the first one, when we realized what was actually happening, and all of our minds were blown. And I remember being on with my team saying, I know exactly what we're going to do. I'll be back with you later this week. and I remember, again, not wanting to swear. We're naughty swearers when we're Brits. But, you know, I mean, what the actual? And so I guess I drew on resilience, something that we all try to teach our children. And I'm always fascinated if you can actually teach it, I don't know. What I find with every single entrepreneur story is when we're together privately and we share stuff, like I look forward to doing with you one day over a glass of Noughty, Elizabeth, in the same room at the same time, is often in our history, we've had challenges, and sometimes bigger challenges than we might share. And I think usually there's a story. And when I look back, I think I probably developed single-minded resilience pretty young. I'm always fascinated with the nature-nurture debate. And as my kids have got older and I've got older, I think I used to be very much down for if we're in the casino, I'm going chips heavily in on nurture. Actually, I might go the other way now on nature. I'm very competitive. I think type A is very useful for entrepreneurship. I am collegiate. I'm a team player, but I don't like to lose. And so I just had to dig very deep and improvise. And I guess it's that classic thing of, as a leader, even of a small team, leadership really is, it's sometimes a bit of an uncomfortable place because we're in a new modern world of authentic leadership, which I think is fantastic in many ways. But I still believe as the leader, you don't need to put it all out there. So I didn't share all of my insecurities with the team because to my mind, it's my role to at least act like I know what I'm doing, even if I don't, to make everybody feel comfortable. So that was how I captained that ship. And then I guess fairly quickly, I recognized that we were all online. And I was like, okay, well, I understand TV, I understand cameras. So I guess I had a head start in recognizing that when one is on Zoom, one is aware of one's background, one keeps one's eyes on the prize. You know, there are many things, we all remember those moments, don't we, where everyone bought a lot of their life in the background to Zoom. And, you know, I guess I was always ready for the performative piece because for me, Zoom is a camera and I'm used to live television. So that was how I got online. And I just said, I am sharing my story with anyone who is prepared to listen. And I think it goes back to community, to the world being a small place. I'm always shocked when founders are not always selling. And what I mean by that is my husband can't take me out for a rare dinner, poor thing, without me looking at a list and going, well, there's nothing decent on here if I'm not drinking. So where's the sommelier? You know, I mean, I think they say entrepreneurs become unemployable. And what I mean by that is at that point, I was all in. I was like, this is not going to fail. We've pivoted already to kind of say there's this opportunity. I've just launched my first bottle. This is going to work. So it's that blind faith thing. And of course, I think with blind faith, as long as the idea is sound to start with, I always say to people, if it's like the most insane idea in the world, then blind faith is going to take you to a deathbed and you won't achieve success, right? I think we have to say, you have to at least have it being a reasonably good idea, at least somewhere. I mean, so that kind of baseline level is important. But then blind faith will translate into a relentless, authentic, obsessional, unhealthy work ethic. And I think that's also the bit that not everybody always wants to talk about, because everybody sees me in America doing this, being in a restaurant, you know, what am I doing when I get up in the morning until I go to sleep? You know, entrepreneurs are not always sharing actually the bit that no one much would romanticize.
Exactly how hard it is and how much it takes ownership. How did you come up with the name Noughty?
Well, my husband and I argue about this a lot, and he still thinks it's him, and I still think it's me. But it's my business, so I win. He's incredibly creative. I mean, a real creative genius. I'd go so far as to say, actually, in terms of storytelling, he's a publicist, strategist, and creative person in the film and TV world, actually. And so I think we played around with all those ideas one night, and I say I came up with it. He says he does. I still think I did. But it was that idea of a play on words. So naught in Britain is 0. So that was the play with the changing the word naughty, mischief, to the O, the 0, which we liked, that was a bit oblique for Americans, and America was always a focus of mine. And I also like the idea that it was playful with mischief, because there's always this kind of stereotype of non-alcoholic being really depressing and boring, and oh God, we're all sober and it's all really dull. And I like the idea of really flipping that on its head too. So it was that kind of beautiful subtlety that I really liked and thought that we could play with. And then Thomson and Scott, which a few of my American friends have said, so it sounds like an American law firm, was really the kind of heritage element of the brand, which I guess is a bit like LVMH and Veuve Clicquot. So I wanted Thomson and Scott to be that kind of heritage element, and then Noughty was the brand element that was in that non-alcoholic brand build space. I like the one word thing. A lot of my favorite brands are one word. I also like the idea that around the world it was easy to pronounce. And my business partner is another genius in the drinks building space, and he had founded a very famous English craft beer called Camden from the North London, and there were 3 founders, and one of them works with me very closely, and he was also really instrumental in that idea of this kind of one word thing.
Well, I love it. And can I tell you how many people that I've said I've had Noughty, they tried Noughty, I brought it to a restaurant in Palm Beach, and everyone was like, what is that? What is that? Oh my gosh, I love the name. So kudos to you. It's an amazing name.
Well, I love the way you Americans say it. It's my favorite way of listening. You say it better than us.
Oh my. And I think you say it better. Isn't it so funny? We always want what somebody else has. You know, it's when I first got sober, which was, 17 years ago. That's a long time ago. And back then in the dark ages, there were no options. There was no Martinelli. I mean, all you had was Martinelli's and O'Doul's. And that was not an option. And today it's so amazing, because I am watching from where I'm sitting that there's so many new ways, for one, to get sober, to be healthy. I love Athletic Brewing, that they started it because they were athletes and they didn't want the alcohol in it. And having these options is so huge. So last year at this time, I was in an article in the Washington Post. The writer reached out to me and she said, all right, it's going to be the holidays. Here we come. We're going to get to Thanksgiving here in the US. We're going to get to Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever holiday you celebrate this time of year. And it's time to get together with families. Now, when you and I were growing up, people had cocktail parties and dinner parties a lot more than they do today. But it seems around the holidays, it's for sure you go home, whatever that home looks like, right? If it's your neighbor, if it's your friend, if it's your family, if it's your mom and dad, and you show up for dinner and there's no options. You're like, wait a minute. And you might be, let's even say, newly pregnant. You don't want to tell anybody. Let's say you're taking a medication. You just got a diagnosis that you don't want to be drinking. And you also aren't ready to tell the world about it. And you show up and there's nothing to drink. And who wants to drink water? Exactly. There were no, and so I am like so grateful for what you've done, because when I started this, I started this podcast over 6 years ago. I've started busy. I was first sober, not ashamed. Then I was busy living sober. I've been doing this for a long, long time. And to have these options, I just have to say thank you, because it really is, it's a game changer for people.
You were a trailblazer. I mean, a bit like my mother, we talked about, you were really ahead of the curve, weren't you? Which I think is quite fascinating in itself. And I think anyone who sees the future, even without realizing it in that concrete way, I think is a trendsetter. And I think that's what you were and are. And I think, well, thank you for sort of blazing the trail. And I kind of feel like I should have done this sooner. But what I would say is the time is right for the spotlight. I mean, like the fact that we're not laughed out of town. And what I love, you mentioned, and we both mentioned Athletic and Bill, and he's such a rock star, the founder of Athletic Brewery. And what I think is lovely about Noughty is I feel like we can do that for the wine industry, because I think there's a lot of complicated non-alcoholic drinks that mixologists can do, and they're really complex and interesting, and that is really sexy stuff. But what is really clear about my brand is a bit like Bill's beer brand, is you just show up with the bottle, if it's sparkling or the white or rosy, you chill it and you open it, and it's exactly like the real wine without the alcohol. I mean, albeit with different nuanced taste, flavors, palette. But when I say exactly like, I mean it operates like in the same lane as. And it was creating that inclusive drinking experience and not trying to create replicas, but just trying to create the best non-alcoholic wine I could, while not doing that classic awkward curveball that a lot of drinks are relying on to build up palate, which is sugar. And we've really got to talk about that elephant in the room, because I'm not throwing any brands under the table, absolutely not. But really, from a health perspective, if you're going to cut your alcohol and replace it with sugar and chemicals, it's not a useful way to go, right? And the easy way to build up anything in the non-alcoholic space is to put in the sugar for the taste, throw in a few chemicals. I mean, that is not a cool way to really approach a drink. And for us as consumers, because there's a lot of smoke and mirrors with ingredients labeling, we don't always know. So I think what I always like to get center stage with my brand is we have stayed in that purity lane. We are low in sugar. We're open about what's in the bottle. We're low in calories. You know, we are as pure as we can be in terms of our making process, exactly like when I had a champagne. And I think that's really important to share. I don't want to encourage anyone to swap out alcohol for sugar. That's not the way the world should go, not from a health perspective, at least.
Not at all. And I know, I mean, you know as well as I do that when you would drink a bottle of wine, that's like having a piece of cake, if not more, right? That's as much sugar as it is, right?
Exactly. And we don't always talk about that. And it's a bit of an awkward conversation for a lot of people. And again, I never mentioned any other brands. I'm always focused on positivity. But I think it is something that consumers might want to be aware of, particularly if they're cutting alcohol. You know, let's not replace it with those sugar and chemicals.
I love that, because we don't talk about it. And I will say to people, they're like, well, I'm not having dessert because, and I'm like, I drank so much before, and then I did replace it with sugar. I'm not going to lie. I went to ice cream was my thing, right? I went to ice cream. I lost weight because I stopped drinking, but then I gained weight because I was eating all this sugar. And today, if you decide, if you're out there and you're listening and you're like, this is my first holiday season and I've been only focused on what desserts I'm going to bring, think about instead of what you're going to bring to drink that's delicious, it's pretty, and it doesn't have any alcohol in it. And the sugar is really low.
That's a really good point, Elizabeth. And I think the branding was really important to us because, of course, the liquid's most important. I always say, start with the liquid. If your liquid's not great, you're on a highway to nowhere. So, of course, I was obsessional about trying to make the best non-alcoholic wine I could. Equally, branding was important because I think we wanted from the get-go to operate in the conventional fine wine space and say, this bottle is comfortable on a table with fancy alcoholic wine. And what I love about our drinkers is a lot of them just use for balance. So we have a lot of fine wine drinkers who actually switch in and out of drinking conventional alcoholic wine and then Noughty and back again on different occasions. And often you get people at the dinner table now who have a glass or two of champagne and then move to the Noughty sparkling Chardonnay. So there are many ways people are enjoying Noughty. But what's lovely is you don't have to shout about the fact that it's non-alcoholic if you don't want to. And that's really key. Obviously, I love people cheerleading the brand. But if you're walking around a party with a glass of Noughty Rouge, a red wine in your hand, it looks exactly the same as whichever Napa cab your friend's drinking. It doesn't have to be the conversation. And you touched on that nuance. Not everybody needs to talk all the time about why they're not drinking. Who cares? Just drink something delicious, right? And that's really where we can operate in that crossover part of the Venn diagram, which I think is really exciting, and particularly for the holiday season. So not only encouraging us all to think about having a bottle of Noughty or whichever brand you prefer for people who aren't drinking, equally for us, so that we wake up and feel fresh every morning. So even if you and I were drinking wine, hypothetically, tonight, I still want to keep my A game tomorrow because I've got a spin class, I've got an early meeting. So great, I'll take a glass or two of the Sonoma Chardonnay, and then I'm going to switch to Noughty Blanc. Brilliant. Then I can wake up and feel fresh. And that for me is when it starts to get really exciting in the entertaining space.
Oh, I think it's so exciting. And to be able to walk into your Thanksgiving, because I know it's so vulnerable, right? It's so vulnerable when you're getting sober. And I can say that for myself because, I remember being in the beginning and still today when you meet new people, I've moved to a different place. So I have new friends. And so you walk into the party and you don't want everybody to be looking at you to be defined as just one thing. Like, I can't drink. Okay, that's the one thing you're going to look at me about. I don't want you to do that. So you walk in with, and by the way, congratulations on being #1 in US News and World Report. That is amazing. USA Today, that is amazing.
It blew my mind. Thank you.
Well, you made a great product that's absolutely, the bottle's beautiful. The actual drink is delicious. I'm so grateful for it. And so if you're out there and you're listening, for one, it is the holidays. You don't need to be ashamed. You don't need to just walk in with your pumpkin pie or your apple pie or whatever it is you want to bring as the guest, but making sure it's a huge tool before you walk in is making sure you have what you like to drink. Now, where can people buy Noughty?
Sure. Well, we're all across America, but the easiest way, since you've got such a broad audience, is via our American website, which is noughtyaf.com. And that's Noughty with an O. So that's NOUGHTYAF.com. And American friends, that's you being naughty. That stands for alcohol free.
I love it. It is, meeting you when we met a couple months ago, I guess it was. And hearing your story and your passion and how you wanted to change this space and the fact that you've done it is just amazing. And it's just a true testament for who you are, Amanda. And I just love that. And I love that you're out there and you're representing this. You're absolutely stunningly beautiful, by the way. And she's brilliant.
Well,
oh my gosh.
I need you to be my cheerleader. This has been the best part of my week. You're too kind. Thank you. Back at you.
Oh, well, thank you. And I just think that everybody knowing that you don't have to feel like you're isolated. I will tell you this. I did get on a flight on JetBlue, which is a US. I mean, now it's kind of doing, I think they're going to the Caribbean. I don't know if they're going to Europe yet, but they had athletic brewing on the actual plane to offer to guests. And if you could get on planes, how amazing would that be?
We're working on it, Elizabeth. These things take a little time. We're working with British Airways in the first class lounge, London Heathrow Terminal 5. I'm talking with airlines around the world. These things take time. I am certainly working on it. It kind of blows my mind to think that we have not given everybody an equal seat at the table if they're not drinking. And I've had some crazy moments where people have said to me, this is the first time I have felt included. It's kind of embarrassing that champagne with alcohol has been the tool of celebration. And so for any myriad number of reasons, if you've not been drinking, you've not been part of that celebration. And so for me, the fact that my brand can represent that is huge. And secretly, Lizzie, or not so secretly, now I'm sharing with you on the podcast, when I'm long gone, I think that the legacy I want to leave is the fact that anytime anyone is drinking a bottle of Noughty, if they're a conventional drinker, say, instead of an alcoholic counterpart, they're actually making a health choice without us even realizing it. And what I love is we are the least sanctimonious brand, but if everybody in the world who gives it any thought and studies any science, we all know that alcohol is ethanol. We can't pretend it's a health food. That's just a practical fact. No one's going to argue with me on that. So if we just work on the sort of premise that you can drink Noughty and it's got that part missing, but you've still got the fun there, it still tastes delicious, it still gets your wine dinner going, that's really a win-win. And that's why my vision now, Lizzie, is to be really anywhere there is good conventional wine. And that's when I start to think that the magic can really happen. If we start to build ourselves onto conventional wine lists, if we start to be poured at these wonderful Thanksgiving tables, and you get this really interesting conversion point that I'm fascinated to see if happens for you in the holidays, which is when the conventional drinkers have a little sip, really like it, and then start to steal your bottle as well. Make sure you've got enough for yourself here. But that's the really interesting conversion point, I think. So there's really a huge vision that I'm working on.
Well, because I can tell you, I just went to a fundraiser a week ago, okay? And I show up and they have the bar set up and they have wine. I think they may have had hard alcohol. I didn't even really pay attention to that. And all they had to drink was plastic bottles of water. And I thought to myself, are you kidding? We're in 2023. You don't have an option. I know 5 years ago, I was staying at a luxury hotel in Hawaii. You know, you walk in, it was my honeymoon, and they, you know, my second marriage, and we'll just talk about it. But they, you know, they said, oh, we have a bottle of champagne in your room. You go to any nice hotel and they have a bottle of champagne sitting there, and they don't even think that, you know what, people are making healthy choices today. Today, we get to make the choices that are better for us. And having you, Noughty, at the disposal of every person when you walk in these hotels to think about the people that are out there rather than thinking, oh, everybody wants to have alcohol. That's not true.
You're so right. And going back to the Rome wasn't built in a day thing, it is a big piece of the jigsaw puzzle we're working on, Lizzie. We're in some Four Seasons already in America, some Ritz-Carltons, a lot of the London five-star hotels. I was just tasting with the JW Marriott in Palm Springs, so fingers crossed we get that listing. So this is happening. You know, these things take a little time, and I think in hospitality's defense, I think they've been through a lot, haven't they, with the challenges of the world and COVID and staffing and the macroeconomic climate. So I think, you know, it's almost like this movement has built up. You were quite radical in that trailblazing scene so early. This movement has built up and gained momentum. And now I think it's really up to brands like me to help make them aware of the opportunity. And also it's a really practical thing, but helping them understand that they can make margin here. And what I mean by that is you're prepared in a beautiful hotel to pay an appropriate price for an upscale drink, even if there's no alcohol in it. And that's where it all starts to get a little easier to make the conversion.
Well, I absolutely, again, I love your brand. I'm going to actually feature it. People have to, they're going to probably have seen it. It's going to, by the time this drops, they might have already seen a little bit of it, but I'm not telling anybody. Shh. But I want to end with this. You know, when I did start on this journey, there were so many, I don't want to say booby traps or what you want to call them, but you know, there were so many ways in the world that it could have messed me up and I couldn't have attained my goals, which were to put down alcohol and become a better, healthier person for my family. And there weren't these options out there. So the fact that there are, and that we don't have to walk to this holiday season knowing I'm going to walk into this house and all there's going to be is Vouv, or all there's going to be is grape, whatever there's going to be in terms of drinks. You can show up today and be your authentic self. Have something in your hand that is not only beautiful, but delicious. And you get to be who you are and own it and not have any shame, because there is I want to end with this, the shame that is involved with people who decide to quit. Because for so long, these alcohol companies were like, drink, 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 drink. And you watch a football game. I mean, if you watch Super Bowl, any of these things, there's all these ads that are like, drink this, drink. It's all alcohol based. Well, the world's waking up.
Absolutely. And we are changing. It's maybe not as fast as we'd like, but we are all working hard on it. And I think you and I have very loud voices, and now people are listening to us, which is really rather wonderful.
Well, thank you again for coming on. It's been such a pleasure. You guys, if you're out there, you're going to be able to see, I'm going to have the Noughty link in the description. So you can go click that link and it will take you right over to Noughty and you can go and buy your bottles so that you have them for this holiday season, because it is going to be so important to stay your authentic self. And if you've decided that you're not drinking for whatever reason, don't let this holiday season mess you up. You know, don't let this be the catalyst to take you out. Go and find other options. They are out there, and Noughty is one of the best. And congratulations.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really ego boost. I don't get much time to have people say nice things to me when I'm building my brand. So I really appreciated it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And everybody that's out there, if you like what you hear, please subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends. Go to my website, elizabeth@elizabethchance.com. You can email me at elizabeth@elizabethchance.com. Reach out. Do not be alone. Just know you can do this journey that we call life. And you can do it alcohol-free and have a great time. Thanks again, Amanda. I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Keep
Stay
getting
naughty.
busy. Stay naughty and get busy living sober. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.